Boker Tov and Shana Tova Tikatevu once again to each and every one of you. For the first 6 months of 2020, I had the pleasure of doing a detailed reading of the stories of the prophet Samuel, King Saul, and King David as my Wednesday afternoon class worked our way through the books of Samuel. Having done such a close reading of these texts gave me new insight into life and politics. Truly, everything one needs to know about politics can be learned from the machinations in the books of Samuel. More importantly, however, are the insights into the Psalms that came from knowing the story of David's life. Among these is one we read each Shabbat and holiday, Psalm 34. The heading of the psalm tells us that David wrote this psalm after he was forced to flee from King Saul and seek mercy in the court of Avimelech. In order to preserve his own life, David actually had to feign madness, behaving in ways completely contrary to his nature. Despite the trouble that he found himself in, David never lost his most distinguishing feature, his absolute faith in God. Thus we read, a psalm of David who feigned madness before Abimelech and was forced to flee. I will praise Adonai at all times, God's glory always on my lips. In Adonai will I exult. Let the humble hear and be glad. Proclaim God's greatness with me. Look to God and be radiant, never to be downcast. Keep your tongue from evil, your lips from speaking lies. If David could write these words, despite the many trials and tribulations that King Saul put him through, his words tell me how much I should remember to be grateful for in my own life. David's words would seem fanciful if you didn't know the story of his life. How could anybody claim to never be downcast? But the psalm reminds us that after having survived the absolute worst, which is the attempt by the king to kill him more than once, all that David could think about the rest of his life was how very lucky he was and how grateful he was for every moment in his life. And that is an object lesson for all of us as well. Yesterday, I spoke about 2 articles I read a few weeks ago. The first was that article about the obsession we have as a nation with, quote, being happy, and how the perceived need to be happy all the time, or expectation that one should be happy no matter what, can have negative effects on people. The second was an article on the dangers of complaining too much. While the two can seem almost opposite from one another, the truth of the matter is that they in some ways carry a similar message. How can happiness be toxic? When the quest for happiness forces you to deny reality, to pretend that you are happy when you are not. As I said yesterday, it is all right. It is acceptable to state a fact. If you are sad, that is a fact. That is not a complaint or merely a feeling. The thing is that we have to be able to balance stating facts and living in reality without moving into the complaint lane. David did not pretend that everything was fine. If he had pretended and smiled, Saul would have killed him. No, he faced the dire reality that he was living in. He did what he needed to do to overcome it, including using the help and support of a close network of family and friends, including 2 of Saul's own children. And when he did overcome, he realized how much he had for which to be grateful. His friends did not try and dissuade him of the difficulty he was facing. Instead, they asked what they could do to help, and then they did it. Just as Professor Deborah Kaysen, a professor of psychiatry and behavioral sciences at Stanford University, said in that article on happiness that we are supposed to do when we are speaking with someone during a crisis It is, she said, really about keeping the attention on the other person. This is the exact same lesson that I gathered from Reverend Bowen, the man behind the 21-day no complaint challenge. According to Reverend Bowen, there are 5 reasons people complain that are easily remembered with an acronym, GRIPE, kind of appropriate. These letters stand for the following: G, get attention; R, remove responsibility; I, inspire envy; P, power; and E, excuse poor performance. Let's run through these quickly with explanations of what each of they are. The first reason that people complain, according to Reverend Bowen, begins with the letter G, to get attention. Everybody needs to connect with other human beings. If there is anything that we have learned over the past 6 months, it is this. However, sometimes people don't know how to start a conversation. And so instead of saying, "Hi, how are you? I'd love to chat with you," they say, "Oh my goodness, the weather is unbelievably hot today, isn't it? I'm schwitzing." Or they say, "Oh my gosh, the traffic was awful. Was it awful for you?" What they're really saying is, "Talk to me, please. I want to interact with you, and this is the only way I can think of to get a conversation started with you right now." I'm sure each of us has seen people or heard people do this, and I am sure that each of us has done that ourselves. The second reason people complain goes with the letter R in GRIPE, to remove responsibility. This kind of complaint is when somebody says, "It's impossible, no one will help me," or "You can't beat City Hall." That is, the person is trying to explain away his or her inability to achieve their goal, whatever that goal is, by painting a hopeless picture. This type of complainer is waiting for those who hear their complaints to, according to Reverend, I keep on wanting to call him Rabbi, according to Reverend Bowen, to validate their victimhood. As he says, they, quote, blame their parents, the economy, their lack of education, their age, anything that may seem plausible. They are consumed with blame and need help accepting that their situation may be the result of the consequences of their own actions and choices. The third reason people complain is I, to inspire envy. This is sometimes called the humble brag. There are many, many different versions of this kind of complaint. There is the classic, "You think if you spend $100,000 on a car, they'd at least give you 2 keys. Another kind of this type of complaint is one in which it's a little bit more complicated, but he gives the example of the following. Say you go to a movie with a friend. You like the movie. You say, "Oh, that was such a fun movie." Your friend, however, says, "You thought that was a good movie? Forget it. The acting was terrible. The storyline was no good. The soundtrack was awful." What this person is trying to say, according to Reverend Bowen, rather than just be a downer, is to say, "I know a lot about movies. Please admire me for my awesome knowledge on movies and ask me questions about movies." That is a very interesting insight, because I know some people who do that about movies. Finally, a kind of complaining to brag is one that I have the feeling some of us have either been on one end or the other of at some point. Let's just take for theoretical purposes. My wife is a terrible driver. She is awful to be in the car with. She just can't drive. While this may seem simply like Lashon Hara or gossip, it really is, according to Reverend Bowen, who is my expert, a form of complaining to brag, because what the person who is saying this is subconsciously wanting to hear is a reassurance of their own awesome qualities. So every time you hear somebody say, my spouse is such an awful driver, what they're really saying is, please tell me I am an awesome driver, right? If they're complaining about somebody else's driving, they want to be reassured that they are not themselves a bad driver. And that often goes with any complaint about an individual. The fourth reason that people complain goes with the letter P, for power. People complain to acquire power. Power salves the ego and brings authority. The squeaky wheel does often get the grease, much more often than we might like. The problem with complaining for the sake of acquiring power is that it often requires recruiting soldiers in your battles. This is called triangulating, which I referred to yesterday. This is unfair to the person who is stuck in the middle. We should all be mindful of not trying to triangulate others or allowing ourselves to get sucked into such a situation. The best way for difficulties to be resolved is if the two people resolve it themselves, like in yesterday's Torah portion between Abraham and the gentleman who he had a conflict with, whose name just escaped me. The fifth and final reason for complaints is to excuse poor performance. We have all heard this one before, and I would be willing to bet that we've all done it ourselves. The sun was in my eyes, that's why I crashed my car. The sun was in my eyes, that's why I couldn't get a good shot on my photo. The alarm clock was broken, that's why I was late. This type of complaint allows people to excuse their poor performance and therefore stay not their best selves. If it is always an outside force keeping somebody from optimal performance, they don't need to improve or even try to improve. These are the 5 reasons, according to Reverend Bowen, that people complain. For each one of the types of complaints in his books, he suggests different ways to respond to the person complaining, all designed to stop the cycle of complaining and get to the underlying reason behind the complaint. Over the next several months, I will share more of his insights on this topic. It's far too big to do in one sermon or even 2. As I continue to go on my own quest to go 21 days without a complaint. Meanwhile, it is in this desire to hear behind the underlying complaint and to help the person you are listening to understand their true needs that I believe the experts in toxic happiness and complaining overlap. In both instances, according to the experts, the main goal of the listener should be to hear behind the unhappy words and help the person expressing them get unstuck. That was the message of this morning's Haftarah from the prophet Jeremiah. In this morning's Haftarah, the people of Israel and Judah, that is the northern and southern kingdoms, were spiritually and emotionally lost, in need of help getting out of their spiritual rut. God repeatedly offers words of comfort and love, saying that he will guide them with compassion, guard them like a shepherd that protects their flock, reward them for their hard work, and provide hope for the future. That is what this holiday is supposed to be about, helping each of us to get out of the spiritual and psychological rut that we are in. The beauty of this season is to remind us through the remembrance of our own history as a people and as individuals that God is always there for us, and that with God always there for us, we can actually improve our lot. God is waiting for us to guide us forward if only we take the first step. A few minutes ago, I shared the 5 reasons why people complain and a few of the ways that those who are listening to someone might understand their situation. But here is a much bigger truth. If we who are doing the complaining become aware ourselves of why we are complaining and what we personally are hoping to accomplish with our own complaints, we can change our words, and we can begin to truly communicate more effectively, accept responsibility for our actions and words, become less negative, more optimistic, etc., etc., etc. As I told you yesterday, I have been on this program for close to a month now, and I did it. I'm now on day 4. I told you yesterday that no matter what, I was not going to complain, and I am now on day 4. And Ezra Hashem, with God's help and with my own determination, tomorrow I will be up to day 5. I've been talking about this program to my coworkers and friends and my family for weeks now. I could have given up. It would have been very easy to give up. The first day, I was really exhausted from going back and forth with the bracelet. But I didn't give up. I haven't given up. I am more aware of my thoughts, my spoken words, the snark that I often put into responses, especially from loved ones. And I am happier than I have been in a long while, despite the continued uncertainty of COVID-19, the lockdown, the riots, the election on the horizon, everything that is happening in our world. I am happy because I know that I am in control of my words and my reactions to others. The less I complain, the more aware I am of the many blessings in my life, my family, job, and in this wonderful and messy world of ours. I truly invite you once again to come on this journey with me. I know that it is not easy, but few things in life that are worth it ever are. It is, however, worth the struggle. Each week at the end of Shabbat, we sing Eliyahu Hanavi, hoping that this will be the week when the Messiah and world peace comes. There is a tale in Jewish tradition that the Messiah would come if only Jews everywhere could observe a single Shabbat altogether. That makes sense to me. But I also believe that it is possible for Mashiach to come if every person could just manage to go a single day without complaining, and instead be grateful for the blessing that is our life, the love that God has for us, the love that we have for ourselves, and the love that we give to others. Please help me make Mashiach come and get your bracelet after the service.